have a hard time believing that there are people on the internet that want to listen to me bitch about books, but there are. But before we do, I'm going to go ahead and cue that awesome intro. I feel like, to be quite honest, if we're being really honest, not too long ago, I broke up with my girlfriend and I have not been okay. As you guys might be able to tell, you probably can tell, I have no makeup on. We are going to do my makeup together while we talk about KINNPORSCHE Book 3. Before we get started, I do have to include a heavy trigger warning. KINNPORSCHE Book 3 gets ridiculously dark, and it was so good. I would say most of the scenes with Kin and Porsche probably brought this book from like a solid 4.5 stars down to like a 3. But I will admit, I did like this book. I finished it in 3 days, but it has taken me 2 months to make this video. So before we get into it, please click the subscribe button and click the thumbs up button and leave a comment down below. All right, we are going to start off with a little recap of what happened at the end of book 2. If you guys have not watched my book 2 video, then I'm going to go ahead and put it up above, down below. It'll be somewhere, guys. Basically, Porsche had enough of everybody lying to him, and he took Shay and he left. He was so angry at Kin, and with good reason, because you know what? Kin sucks. Oh! Damn. Just pretend that that's not there, guys. So that is where we left off with book 2. And book 3 picks up right where book 2 left off. Kin, Kun, and Kim, as well as some of their bodyguards, are in Kin's room. They are going through some documents because, as it turns out, there have been some business secrets, some business information that has been leaked. Wow, I look so pale on camera. And trying to get a clue as to who maybe leaked it. And wouldn't you know, who comes to visit Kin? Our favorite character, our favorite ex of Kin's, Tawan, comes to visit. He can tell that Kin, there's something wrong with Kin, and he wants to know, but Kin is not having it. Look, Tawan tries really hard, okay? Guys, this is gonna annoy me for like the rest of the video. Hold on one second. I'm gonna go change my shirt. Whew, okay, I'm back. I better not get any makeup on this shirt. I will be very mad if I get makeup on this shirt. While Tawan is with Kin, Kin gets a phone call from Porsche, and Porsche is frantic. And we find out that Shay is missing. Shay is nowhere to be found. And then Kin hears a familiar voice in the background, in the back of the call. Take a wild guess who this voice belongs to. But just think about it. It's Vegas. Vegas is helping Porsche to find Shay. After that scene, we actually get the first Vegas and Pete chapter, and it is actually a flashback. So we get a flashback to a few nights ago, or maybe a week ago. I don't know. I don't really know how long it was. And Vegas notices a station wagon parked outside his house, and he knows that it is somebody that was sent by Kin. He knows that Kin has sent somebody to spy on him because, you know, that's just what Kin does. While we are waiting for Vegas to kind of figure out who is in this station wagon, we get Vegas's backstory. We find out that Vegas and Macau's mother is unfortunately dead. She was Kun Khan's accountant, but the first family, as well as the grandfather, did not like Vegas's mother because she wasn't in like the higher rungs of society. So unfortunately, she is framed for embezzlement. And because she is framed for embezzlement, and basically the family makes it like hell on earth for her to continue living, she unalives herself. After we learn about Vegas's mom's unfortunate ending, Vegas calls Big, and they are the ones that are selling company secrets. And Vegas is panicking a bit because, you know, the first family knows that some of their business secrets have been leaked or sold. This is when we find out that Vegas knows that the station wagon belongs to Pete. And so Vegas notices that the station wagon leaves, and he decides that he's going to follow the station wagon. And he follows the station wagon to 7-Eleven. And that is when we get one of the best scenes ever. Pete goes into 7-Eleven, and he runs into Vegas. Now, we get Vegas's point of view at this point in the story, but we eventually get Pete's point of view as well. Vegas decides that he's gonna mess with Pete. He really wants to mess with Pete. He wants Pete to know that he knows that Pete is following him. And so he buys some bread and some mosquito repellent for Pete. And then after he buys those two things, he goes back and he buys condoms for himself. And the look on Pete's face was priceless. Love it. Love it. So then the book jumps back to the Kin and Porsche story, and what we find out is that Shay indeed has been kidnapped. There is a group of men that have kidnapped Shay, and they are holding him in a warehouse. And the mastermind behind this kidnapping is none other than Tawan. Tawan really wants Shay to suffer. And not because he doesn't like Shay, but because he doesn't like Porsche. And the reason why he doesn't like Porsche is because Porsche stands between him and Kin. We find out that the reason why Tawan wants to be with Kin is because his family is bankrupt. And so Tawan wants to get back together with Kin so that he has access to money again, because he went from being like super rich to having nothing, and he doesn't really like that. We then jump to Porsche. Porsche is looking everywhere for Shay, and he is actually talking to Vegas, and Vegas is like, you need to calm down. But Porsche, of course, Porsche's little brother just got kidnapped. So like, how are you going to ask him to calm down at a time like this? Porsche goes looking for Shay, and he does end up finding Shay. He does end up getting into a fight with Tawan. I believe he ends up beating Tawan pretty badly, which honestly, fair. I mean, you kidnapped his little brother. Vegas ends up arriving, and Kin ends up arriving, and Kin ends up convincing Porsche not to beat the life out of Tawan, because Shay is now okay. Unfortunately, Vegas goes home, and we find out that he is going home to a little surprise. So we then get a flashback, and it is in Pete's point of view. Pete knows that Vegas knows that he is following Vegas. And we flash back to the conversation that Pete had with Kin, where Kin asks Pete to spy on Vegas because he does believe that Vegas is, or could be, one of the reasons why there is information that has been leaked. We then get the 7-Eleven scene from Pete's point of view, which was pretty funny because Pete is terrified of Vegas. He really, oh man, he is scared of Vegas. So Pete has this task from Kin to spy on Vegas, and he needs to do some surveillance. So he asks Tangkun to help him out. Tangkun goes over to the second family's house under the pretense that he has documents from his father to give Kun Khan. And while he is distracting Kun Khan, Pete can go and check out the layout of the house. It's been a while since I read this book, and I did take my notes, but I do believe that Pete goes with Tangkun. Tangkun ends up leaving without Pete, and then Pete is stuck in the house. Well, Pete goes to Vegas's room, and he goes on his computer, and he finds something very disturbing that he sends to Kin, because don't forget, Kin sent him to spy on Vegas. So he finds out some information, he sends it to Kin, and unfortunately his phone dies. He hears something, and so he quickly closes the computer and he hides in the closet, and it turns out to be Vegas. Vegas is talking to Big. Pete finds out that Vegas was the one to drug Porsche, and that Big helped him because Big is working with the second family. We then go back to Kin and Porsche together. Shay is now safely with Kim, and Kin and Porsche are in the car, and Kin gets the videos that Pete sent him from Vegas's computer. And it turns out that Vegas has been sleeping with all of the men that Kin has been sleeping with. All of his escorts, all of his ex-boyfriends, one-night stands, all of it. He has videos of him sleeping with all of these men. A bunch of other stuff happens, including Kin being Kin, and they go back to the house and they're in Kin's room, and Kin wants to do those adult activities. He wants to get dirty. He wants to do it. And Porsche, understandably, does not, because his little brother was just kidnapped and he is like not in the mood. But Kin forces him to. And after he forces him to, and after Kin leaves to go do something, Porsche gets on the balcony, and understandably, some people from the house like recognize Porsche on the balcony, and they're like, Porsche, what are you doing, man? And Porsche is just being Porsche. And they're all like, Porsche, get down from there, please get down from there. And, you know, Kin is like, I care about you. And Porsche is like, well, if you really cared about me, you wouldn't do these things to me. And that is when we get the first I love you. Kin, in front of everybody in the house, in front of his brothers, in front of his dad, in front of the bodyguards, screams at the top of his lungs that he loves Porsche. And Porsche is satisfied, but unfortunately he loses his balance and he ends up falling on top of Tankoon. The scene is pretty funny. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's also pretty funny because Tankoon is funny. Also, please do not judge me. Please don't judge me for this. I just love a shiny inner corner, and I went a little crazy. I went just a little bit wild, but it's okay. You're not here for the makeup. This isn't a makeup tutorial. You're here to hear about KINNPORSCHE Book 3, and so I'm going to continue telling you about KINNPORSCHE Book 3, okay? Not to give you POV whiplash, but we are now back to Vegas and Pete, and this is Vegas's point of view. Vegas comes home. He has had a row with his dad. Kun Khan is actually very abusive, and he really does not like the fact that both Vegas and Macau are gay. And he is married, and his wife is pregnant. And he tells Vegas and Macau that he is going to raise his next son properly so that his next son is not gay like Vegas and Macau. But anyways, he has been fighting with Kun Khan, and he goes to his room, and he notices that his computer is hot, which is weird because he hasn't used his computer in a while. So that is what indicates to Vegas that something is off, someone has been in his room, and Vegas goes looking, opens the closet door, and finds Pete. He pulls Pete out of the closet, and he starts hitting him and punching him and just really taking out all of his anger on Pete. And this is where the dark material really sets in. Because Vegas decides that he wants to torture Pete to death. And the way that he is going to start is by violently forcing himself on Pete. Pete actually blacks out from the pain at one point. Vegas chains Pete's wrist, and he uses Pete as his toy. He violently forces himself on Pete several times. So while all this is going on, Pete has some inner monologues, and we learn about Pete's family. Turns out that his parents died when he was very young, and he was raised by his grandma and grandpa in the islands. When he was 18, he left the island and moved to Bangkok to try and find a job. And for a year, he was like bouncing around trying to find a job until he got contracted by the first family. The first family was very good to him. They paid him well, they trained him well, and they also sent money to his grandparents back on the island. So Pete really has a strong connection to the first family. He feels very loyal to them. We then go back to the KINNPORSCHE part, and I believe it's in Kin's perspective. And it's been a few days. It's been a few days since Shay got kidnapped by Tawan. It's been a few days since the balcony scene, and something just doesn't feel right. And then he realizes that it's Pete, that Pete is gone. So we go back to Pete in Vegas. Pete is now chained by the wrist in Vegas's bedroom. Vegas comes into the room, and Pete notices that Vegas has a lot of red marks on his face. We find out that it's normal, and it is because Kun Khan is abusive towards his children. And there were some problems with the business. Business isn't doing so great. And Kun Khan decides that it is Vegas's fault and takes his anger out on Vegas. This is the first time that we see Pete sympathize for Vegas a bit. He does feel bad for Vegas because, Vegas is a terrible person, but even a terrible person doesn't deserve to be abused by their father, the one who is, supposed to love them. We then get a conversation between Pete and Vegas where Vegas is talking about how his dad constantly compares him to Kin and how he hates Kin because he hates being constantly compared to Kin. And that's when we get my favorite line out of the whole novel, which is when Pete asks Vegas why he keeps comparing himself to Kin. If he doesn't like being compared to Kin, then why does he do it himself? In response, Vegas decides to violently force himself on Pete again. When Vegas leaves, Pete decides that his survival strategy, the way that he is going to get out of this house, the way that he is going to escape, is that he is going to annoy and bore Vegas. He's just going to go along with whatever Vegas wants him to do. Vegas comes home from university classes one day, because don't forget, this is a mafia story, but it's also a BL. And BL characters need to be university students. Vegas comes back from university and asks Pete to help him with some of his university work. While they're working on the project or the assignment that they're doing, Vegas falls asleep on the couch, and Pete finishes his work and he decides that he's going to go to sleep. But before he goes to sleep, he decides to cover Vegas with a blanket because he wonders if Vegas is cold. Vegas does not deserve Pete's empathy, especially since Pete is just the sweet little cupcake that he is. However, it is nice to see Pete's inner monologue and to start seeing Vegas as a very damaged individual instead of the monster that he's made out to be. Pete and Vegas start talking about their families. Vegas tells Pete about his mom growing up with an abusive dad, his dad having just many wives after Vegas's mom dies, and now he is with, I believe her name is Pim. I'm not sure. Correct me in the comments, though. He is currently married to a young woman who is pregnant, and Vegas just does not like her. And Pete tells him about the death of his parents and his grandparents and the island and all of that. And they have a little moment, and Pete gets hungry. Vegas so far has been feeding Pete all of this super like diet food, like salads and like grilled fish and all of that. And Pete is a Southern boy. He's used to Southern food. He's used to food that really fills you up. And so he's super hungry. Vegas goes to make him some noodles. And he comes back, and Pete notices that the noodles are very watery. And he says something. He says, like, why is there so much water? And he's criticizing these noodles. And so Vegas takes the noodles away and leaves the room. Pete is worried that Vegas is not going to feed him now because he was complaining about the noodles. And it turns out that Vegas comes back and he made another batch of noodles for Pete, and he made it better. We then get a scene with some of Vegas's friends. They come over to do a project. Pete hides in the bathroom. One of the friends goes to use the bathroom and finds Pete. And Pete thinks that this is the perfect opportunity for him to get help. And it turns out that Vegas's friends are just as terrible as he is. And Vegas's friends are telling him how lucky he is to have his own, like, sex toy. Pete is scared. Vegas gives Pete an ultimatum and tells him, look, either you can stay with me and do what I want you to do, or you can go with my friends. And of course, Pete is like, no thanks, I'll stay here. I'm not going with your friends. And this is when Pete starts to become very confused because he recognizes that he is empathizing with Vegas, and he is starting to care about Vegas. He really wants to make things better. He wishes that he could make Vegas feel okay. And we get this scene where Pete notices that he has some stubble, because Pete has been here for a while, okay? Pete has been here for like at least a week at this point, if not longer. And he notices that he has some stubble. And so he asks Vegas if he can shave himself. And Vegas says, nah, I'll do it for you. And after Vegas shaves him, Vegas gives him a kiss, and Pete is like, oh my God, like, he kissed me. What is this? But also he notices that his heart is like beating faster, and thus begins the confusion because Pete is starting to have feelings for Vegas. We then get a chapter where we learn a little bit more about the dynamic between Vegas and his dad. So they are at a meeting with a client. Vegas is thinking about Pete. He's wondering what he's doing, if he's bored, if he's hungry, what food should he bring Pete. He's really concerned about Pete. And Kun Khan interrupts his inner monologue and is like, hey, can you go take care of Justin real quick? It turns out that Kun Khan has been promising certain favors to his clients, and those favors involve Vegas. And so Vegas picks up the client, Justin, and they start doing it in the back seat. And all of a sudden, while Vegas is doing these adult activities with Justin, he is thinking about Pete. And he notices while he is servicing Justin and he's thinking about Pete, he is all of a sudden getting a lot of energy. And that whole situation ends in Vegas saying Pete's name. Instead of yelling out Justin's name, he yells out Pete's name. So then we go back to Kin and Porsche, and Kin finds out that Pete went to go spy on Vegas alone. Tang-kun left him at the second family house, and Kin is not having it. Which, this is the one and only time that I actually really liked Kin, because he was furious that Pete went alone, because he knows how dangerous Vegas is, and he knows that if Pete was alone, something has probably happened to Pete, because they haven't seen him in like 2 or 3 days. They don't know what's going on. They don't know if Pete is okay. Kin gets a call from Chan. I believe he is Kun Korn's bodyguard. And Chan says that they have found the remains of a body, and they are worried that it is Pete's body. They go to the hospital to identify the remains. Pete's grandparents come. They conclude that the remains that they found must be Pete's. And so the book ends with Tang-kun having a funeral for Pete. I think the funeral lasted like a week. And guess who goes to the funeral? Vegas goes to the funeral. Keep in mind, Vegas knows exactly what has happened to Pete. And so he is at this funeral pretending like he has no idea. Overall, I think I gave this book maybe a 3 or a 3.5 stars. I'm not sure. I actually enjoyed it. I personally love Pete. He is a great character. He's wonderful. He's very strong, but he's very kind. He's actually a bit of a prankster, and he has a sense of humor. And he's just a very well-rounded character. His relationship with Vegas, I actually do like Vegas's character, especially when we get to learn why he is the way that he is. When we learn about his backstory, when we learn about his mom, when we learn about his dad's abuse and his dad's homophobia, and I start to like Vegas. He is still an atrocious human being who has done unbelievably disgusting things, especially to Pete. However, when you learn about his dad basically selling him to their clients and then abusing him later, you know, you start to just like, you start to understand a little bit. Kin and Porsche were Kin and Porsche. That's all I can say about them. Kin and Porsche are just an extra level of annoying and unbearable. But one of the reasons I will say that I enjoyed book 3 and book 4 was Pete and Vegas. Okay, they're so much more interesting. Vegas is not a likable character, but he is an interesting character. Pete is very likable. So I have finished book 4. I do need to take my notes on book 4 so that I can make my video. However, I am going to take a break between this video and the next KINNPORSCHE video, and I'm going to do a video on another book, another BL. Don't worry, I will come back for KINNPORSCHE book 4. And I do also plan on making a video where I talk about the bonus chapters that happen after the end of the story. I promise I will come back to KINNPORSCHE, but for those of you guys who have read the novels, you know that it's just, it gets to be too much. Especially in the next book, we find out the connection between Porsche's family and the first family. If you guys watched my first video, you'll remember that I said that I was going to continue reading these books because I wanted to know how Porsche's family was connected to the first family. I found out I don't like it. I don't like it. So if you guys want to see my next KINNPORSCHE video, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. And leave me a comment down below. We've just had great conversations in the comment section. So be sure to leave a comment and don't forget to include a cat emoji in your comment to thank Kitten for convincing me to finally make this video, because without her, I don't know when this video would have been made. I really did not expect my first KINNPORSCHE video to do as well as it did, and the second one did well as well. And so now I'm kind of just a BL booktuber, which I'm not mad at. If you guys have any suggestions for future videos, also be sure to leave it in the comments down below. And I'll see you guys in my next video very soon. Did I just spend the last 20 to 30 minutes rearranging my living room to find a spot to record this video? Yes. Yes. Yes, I did. I love Kun. I love Tankun. And while Tawan is visiting Sir Kin, Mr. Kin, God, I hate him. Pete in the novel doesn't know as much about Vegas as series Pete, to be quite honest. He's been following him for a few days before he goes to do surveillance, but he really doesn't know what Vegas is like as a person. And so he's speculating over all of the evil things that Vegas does to people. Which, yeah. Yeah, Vegas is terrible. Vegas is a terrible person.